Hello, Jenny Rotten here. So I had just uploaded another video, if you didn't catch that one, on development of humans, I guess, the alien, skull heads. While I was researching for that, just to kind of pull up a few things, I found this article. I find this really fascinating. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. It might be boring to some, so if that's not your thing, goodbye. However, if this is your thing, I'm hoping you'll find this article really interesting as much as I did. So this comes to us from Science News, independent journalism since 2020 or 1921. The culture helps shape when babies learn to walk. This was interesting. Motor development models based on Western standards are just too narrow. My little baby, how cute. Oh my goodness. Okay. So let's look here. This was written and posted September 10th of 2019. And I'm just going to read through it. For generations farther back than anyone can remember, the woman in Rano Dojanava's family, I'm probably going to say a lot of these things wrong this morning, have placed their babies in gavoras, cradles that are part diaper and part restraining device. Dodo Genova, a recent assistant who lives in Tajikistan, was cradled for the first 2 or 3 years of her life, and she cradled her 3 children in the same way. Ambiguity, I know that word and I can't think of it. Well, I'm going to skip it. Excuse me. I'm going to skip that one. Ubiquity, I'm not even going to try. Throughout Central Asia. So in other words, that word means everyone. The wooden gavora is often a gift for newlyweds, and the mothers position their babies on his back with his bottom firmly over a hole. Underneath is a bucket to capture whatever comes out. Then she binds the baby with several long swaths of cloth, of fabric, so that only the baby's head can move. And next, she connects a funnel, specially designed for either boys or girls, to send urine out to the same bucket under the cradle. And finally, she drapes heavy fabric over the handle atop the gavora to protect the child from bright lights and insects. The baby stays in that womb-like apparatus for hours on end, with use decreasing as the child ages. When babies fuss, mothers often shush them by vigorously rocking the cradle back and forth or leaning over the side to breastfeed. Besides keeping babies dry and warm, gavoras provide a sense of safety, Dojo Giovanna says. It is very nice for children because they are bound and cannot move. Eventually, they are running and jumping like children everywhere. To the uninitiated, this child-rearing approach may sound odd or even shocking. Yet cultures should be viewed within their own context, says psychologist Catherine of New York University. We engage in practices that fit our needs, our own everyday lives. Though Central Asia is home to 73 million people, Western researchers such as Tomas Lemunde have only recently begun to document the gavora's use and possible impact on how children grow. Ignoring cultural variation of this sort leaves a big blind spot in the science of child development. Western researchers and medical staff define, quote, normal development. In this case, how and when babies acquire motor skills such as sitting, crawling, and walking, based on a century of research on mostly white Western babies. Now, a few motor development experts are pushing back with a new line of thinking that traces back to the 1950s, when evidence for huge variations in how and when babies acquire motor skills began to emerge as a piecemeal way. At that time, anthropologists and cultural psychologists working in far-flung locales started documenting how babies in different cultures move about. In recent decades, that research has become more systematic, Scientists are comparing the motor skills of babies in various cultures and creating controlled experiments to see if training can speed up the development of certain skills. And motor skills don't arise in isolation. When a baby begins to sit, crawl, or walk, she gains a new view on the world, which alters her perception. It also influences how babies and caregivers communicate. A baby who has learned to walk, for instance, will often carry objects to her mother, who frequently responds with words or ways of speaking that are new to the baby. So researchers are also studying how cultural influences other areas of development linked to motor skills. This research is, quote, not just about walking, says Lana, a developmental psychologist at the City University of New York's College of Staten Island. Quote, it's all about what walking gives babies. As this work continues among broader populations, it becomes clear that across continents and cultures, children with the ability to do so will learn to walk. For some babies, that tentative first step may occur at 8 months old. For others, age 2 or 3 is a perfectly good time to start exploring. And here you see a picture of one of these devices in the Gavora. And you can see how the baby's just kind of strapped down, and she can rock it there. It's got a little netting, and the baby just kind of hangs out there, much like a cradle. The rule book. Many parents in Western cultures are familiar with infant motor development charts. 3-month-olds might be shown lifting their heads. 6-month-olds are sitting, and 12-month-olds are walking. The implication is that babies learn to get around on a relatively fixed timeline, regardless of environment or experience. Such charts trace their origins to the early 1900s, when developmental psychologist Arnold Gesell of Yale University began filming babies from behind a one-way mirror. Based on 12,000 recordings, Gesell outlined in 1928 a developmental schedule for babies from 3 to 30 months old. Meanwhile, psychologist Nancy Bailey began to study tracking development in more than 60 white babies born to relatively affluent families in Berkeley, California in the late 1920s. That decades-long project, known as the Berkeley Growth Study, prompted Bailey to develop a way for a non-family member to assess a child's development, including motor skills. She rolled out the Bailey Scales of Infant Development in 1969. Researchers and clinicians still widely use those scales now in their 4th iteration. Gesell, Bailey, and others thought that babies begin to move when their bodies matured enough to do so, and that motor skills emerged along a linear path, with sitting coming before crawling and crawling before walking. But that thinking hinged on a small set of U.S. babies. In the early 2000s, the World Health Organization sought to broaden research on motor development to include the rest of the world. WHO researchers measured motor skills acquisition from 4 months to age 2 among 816 babies from 5 countries: Ghana, India, Norway, Oman, and the United States. The analysis appearing in 2006 in Acta some word that I can't say in some foreign language, outlined windows of development during which certain motor skills should arise. Failure to achieve these skills within given windows, 8 to 18 months for walking independently, for instance, was considered, quote, evidence of abnormal growth. Unfortunately, the WHO relied on Bailey's motor scale, which meant the study used white U.S. babies as a standard of comparison. Also, the research lacked babies from cultures where scientists have documented accelerated or uneven patterns of motor development, including the many cultures of Central Asia. When, quote, norms based on a narrow sample of babies gets built into a model, and then that model is applied to a different but still narrow sample of babies, the whole system falls apart, says Karen. Do you really want to say a third of the world is delayed and another third of the world is accelerated and our part of the world is normal? They need to look beyond the United States. The need to look beyond the United States was driven home by Adolf several years ago when she heard from a woman at Procter and Gamble who had been tasked with selling diapers throughout Central Asia. Sales, the woman said, were abysmal. It seemed the Gavora was to blame. Adolf relayed her story to her graduate student, Alana, who was studying motor development across cultures. She replied that her husband's family is from the region. I know that practice, she said. So, several months later, in early 2014, and in collaboration with UNICEF and Save the Children, Kara Sick, Adolf, and Timis Lamonda launched a study of motor development babies in Tajikistan. And so here we've got some charts here. This is the cultural void. Motor development charts, like the one based on the data from WHO and Canadian researchers, imply that infants learn to move and eventually walk when their bodies are physically ready, and that such skills emerge in order. Yet, such charts do not account for infants raised in cultures that actively encourage or discourage the development of certain motor skills. And that's what we're talking about here. So, you can see the chart. This is roughly, this is like the perfect time. And then, of course, you have before and after. A culture clash. As Gazelle and Bailey were building their models of motor development, other researchers had began to document deviations from those standards. Charles Super, a developmental psychology at the University of Connecticut, recalls reading a paper from a researcher studying Ugandan infants in the 1950s. Ugandan babies walk much earlier than babies in the West. The researcher wrongly interpreted that difference as inferiority, suggesting that fast development would mean intellectual stunning, Super recalls. I didn't like that argument. In the 1970s, Super moved to Kenya with his wife, an anthropologist. He began investigating motor development among babies born in a farming community known as Kokwet. Between 1972 and 1975, he documented when those babies acquired new motor skills using the Bailey scale and interviewed mothers about their child-rearing practices. Kokwet babies sat, stood, and walked about a month earlier than Western infants. Super reported in 1976 in Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology. But the babies were slower to master other skills, such as lifting their head, rolling over, and crawling. Super observed that mothers wore their babies on their back while laboring in the field. He suspected that vigorous motion gave the babies the sort of constant exercise needed to help develop strength and agility. The mothers also told Super they actively trained their children to walk through exercises like air stepping. The parents had a theory. If you don't teach your child to walk, they won't walk, Super says. At the same time, however, mothers sought to keep their babies from crawling, given a myriad of dangers on the ground, such as open fire pits and snakes. The training combined with these restrictions probably explains the developmental patterns that Super observed that were outside the normal ranges. His findings agreed with observations made elsewhere. For instance, anthropologist Alma Gottliebs, we're just going to call her Gott, research on the Bing people in the Ivory Coast late in the 1970s and early 1990s showed that Bing babies sat earlier than Western babies, but are actively discouraged from walking before age 1. The Bing believes that early walking can cause a grandparent's early death. A visitor, and keeping the babies close and happy discourages the little ones from returning to a previous life. A little picture of the babies on the mommy's back. When German psychologist Heidi Keller used Bailey's rubric on the NSO people of Cameroon, is that Nassau? In the 1990s and 2000s, she found that their motor skills were mostly advanced compared with German babies. She attributed the difference to the fact that no-so babies are in constant contact with caregivers and provided with regular exercise and massage. Every culture emphasizes the domains of development that are considered important, Keller says. Motor skills can be acquired out of order and selectively accelerated or decelerated through cultural practices. Research by Super, Gott and Keller, and others have shown. In recent years, researchers have conducted experiments to see if training can accelerate motor skill development. At a public pool in Iceland, one dynamic swim instructor taught a dozen 3 to 5 year old babies to stand atop a hand or board, well in advance of the 9 month quote norm for standing. Researchers reported in the 2017 Frontiers in Psychology. And here's a picture down here. I'll go back up, but there's the picture of the baby standing on the board in the pool. How cute. One natural unintended experiment came from advice from the American Academy of Pediatrics in the 1990s. To reduce the risk of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, which is more likely to occur in babies who sleep on their bellies, the Academy suggested that babies be placed on their backs to sleep. But back sleeping delayed when those infants developed the ability to roll, sleep, crawl, and stand. Importantly, studies looked into the delay found that these babies eventually caught up to the stomach sleeping peers. Just in case, the Academy now recommends daily tummy time where babies play on their stomachs and build strong muscles. I think anyone who had a kid in the 90s is well aware of that. Don't put babies to sleep on their back. And that, they could die of SIDS. I'm not exactly sure. I think there's some more information that goes on to that. Maybe I'll deep dive in there into. It's been several years, many years, decades since I've looked into that, see what's new out there. Cradled and bound. So rugged, mountainous Tajikistan is bordered by China, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the country experienced a civil war. Today, infrastructure remains poor, with snow and flooding making the winding mountain roads impassable for much of the year. Those logistical challenges have limited research to the capital city of Dushanbe and surrounding villages. She travels with behavioral scientist Scott, who got involved with the work while spending a semester in Adolf's lab. Karasik, and a Belarusian refugee who moved to the United States in 1989 at age 10, is well suited to working in Tajikistan. She can communicate in Russian, which many Tajiks still speak, fostering a level of trust in Kara not often afforded to outsiders. She has also recruited Dodo Giovanna and other local Tajik women to run her project while she's away. What's so little known about Gavora cradles, especially in rural areas, Kara's first order of business was to document Tajik life. In the villages Kara and her team visited, families live in one-room clay huts and share labor and childcare duties with neighbors. Almost half of the fathers work as laborers in Russia and are absent for extended periods. The rest work odd jobs or are unemployed. Electricity tends to work for only 2 hours in the morning and 2 at night, during which families watch television and eat dinner. The Gavora is placed in the center of the room. Kara's team measured Gavora use through videos and interviews with mothers. All but 3 of the 185 mothers interviewed use a Gavora. The team reported on October 18th in +1. Newborns spent anywhere from 8.5 to 23 hours a day in the cradle, and 2-year-olds spent 2 to 14.5 hours. About 40% of mothers breastfed babies while leaning over the Gavora, and 83% of the moms engaged in vigorous rocking that lasted anywhere from about 4 to 22 minutes at a time. In July 2018, CARE presented unpublished research in Philadelphia at an International Congress of Infant Studies showing that Tajak babies hit motor skill milestones months later than babies in the WHO study. For instance, at 1 year of age, almost all infants in the WHO sample were crawling and half were walking. At age 1, just 62% of Tajak babies are crawling and 9% are walking. Using WHO standards, almost half of all Tajak babies would be diagnosed with motor delays. But Tajik babies seem to catch up to their Western peers by about age 4, with no discernible long-term repercussions. Data collected shows. What CARE really wants to understand moving forward is how being bound for such long stretches during those early formative years affects other areas of development and even babies' temperaments. And here you can watch a little video of a baby getting strapped in, walking and talking. The idea that the acquisition of new motor skill triggers other skills is known as the development cascade. And when a baby acquires a new way of getting around, the child's vantage point changes, along with interactions with caregivers and the ability to explore the environment, says Eric. Eric Wall, Wall is particularly interested in the link between walking and language, and hence the name of the title of this video. After discovering that babies, this is just so interesting. This just goes along with, meaning of life theory. You end up with this snowballing effect. After discovering that babies can walk, have larger vocabularies than infants who are still crawling, Wally decided to see what would happen to language skills if he tweaked when babies learn to walk. But, quote, you can't really experimentally manipulate walking onset. In other words, it's kind of hard to do. So Wally did the next best thing. He took his research to Shanghai, where babies typically walk. About 6 weeks later than US, because babies in urban China live in more cramped environments and have less opportunity to move around than US babies. He compared the language skills of a 12.5 month old US babies with 42 Chinese babies aged 13 to 14.5 months. Both groups were almost evenly split between walkers and crawlers. His analysis, appearing in 2015 in Infancy, showed that the same divergent in language abilities seen between walking versus crawling American infants also occurs in Chinese babies. In other words, language skills emerge alongside the ability to walk because their advantage points change, so new things are unlocked for them. Even though these kids were walking later, growing up in a different culture and exposed to very different language, they were showing a similar difference. Walking shakes up the system. A child's view. So Kara is keen to see if the Gavora influences how Tajik babies think. Testing that link in a remote region with a dodgy supply of electricity has proved challenging, though. For instance, eye trackers are often used to study how infants view the world around them, but typically eye trackers are designed to be unexpected. it uses a camera to measure reflections coming off the eye. On a computer screen synced to the tracker, two cartoon animals jump up and down, but only one is paired with a doink noise. When a baby's eyes focus only on the animal making noises, researchers interpret that as the baby correctly pairing sight and sound. An unpublished pilot study of 30 babies in Minnesota suggests that pairing ability appeared at around age 9 months in those babies. In January, they trained Dojo Janava to use the portable eye tracker. If perception and action are linked, and Tajik babies' motor development is delayed relative to Western babies, then the ability to link sight and sound should also be delayed. The researchers are analyzing their data now. And there you see the little baby. There's the little pig jumping up and down, and one is making a doink sound. And they're thinking that that means that the baby is responding to the sound along with the jumping image. In that, I would have to really read that research myself, because honestly, I feel like there are a lot of questions and other reasons as to why that would happen. So I'm not sure I'd take that as its only lesson there. I think there might be some other lessons inside that study, that research, but we're going to keep reading anyway because I'm not a scientist. They also hope to start collecting data on Tajik babies' temperaments, which an infant is thought to manifest as individual differences in reacting to events and regulating emotions. Does restriction in Gavora change how Tajik babies respond to people around them or behave outside the Gavora? Quote, even if babies are out, they may not be taking the opportunity to move. She plans to administer a standard temperament survey that asks moms to answer questions over a week-long period and covers issues such as, quote, how often does your baby play with a single toy or an object for 5 to 10 minutes? And how often does your baby fall asleep within 10 minutes? The team suspects that the Gavora teaches babies restraint. Back when the project first started, Timis recalls the researchers wanted to record babies' cries as they were put in the Gavora, and an idea that was soon scraped. The babies didn't fuss or cry. The idea that the Gavora builds traits like patience and mindfulness resonates with Dojo Javana, who has become one of the cradle's staunchest advocates. In recent years, she has taken to writing pamphlets calling on mothers to continue cradling. The practice is under threat, she says, from disposable diapers, which are now widely available. Isn't that an interesting thing? I found that to be quite interesting when reading this. And to Tajik pediatricians who embrace Western notions that are at odds with cradle use, such as tummy time and breastfeeding in the mother's arms. The Gavora teaches children that they cannot do everything that they want. What parent wouldn't wish for that? And that's the end of that article. Interesting to know, though, that this study came about from listening to someone discuss trying to sell diapers, and it wasn't working for them. So why? What were these people using instead? Anyway, I find that really interesting. So I hope you do too.